Pontius Pilate asked the same question twice before he let himself believe the answer. A man had been nailed to a cross that morning outside the city wall. By mid-afternoon, a soldier came to tell him it was finished. Pilate did not simply nod and move on. He sent for the centurion in charge and made the man repeat it to his face, because in 18 years of governing Judea, Pilate had watched enough executions to know something the crowd at Golgotha did not. Men did not die on a Roman cross in a few hours. They died over days, sometimes 4 of them. So when this particular execution ended before sundown, the most powerful Roman in Jerusalem did something governors almost never do in front of a subordinate. He hesitated. That hesitation is in the record. And it is the loose thread this entire investigation pulls on, because if a Roman governor who oversaw crucifixions for the better part of 2 decades found the timing suspicious, then maybe we should too. Here is what I am going to show you. There is a version of events, hiding underneath the version you were taught, where the men who took the body down were not preparing it for a tomb. They were treating a wound. Where the ointments carried to that tomb were not spices for the dead. They were medicine for the living. Where a man forbade a woman from touching him 3 days later, not because he had become something holy and untouchable, but because his wounds were still raw enough that a single hand could have made him scream. If that version is even partly true, then what happened in that tomb was not a resurrection witnessed by the world. It was a rescue conducted in secret by people who had every reason to make sure nobody outside a small circle ever knew he survived. Now, here is the version everyone knows, the one carved into 2,000 years of art and doctrine. Jesus of Nazareth is arrested Thursday night. He is tried, beaten, and marched to a hill outside Jerusalem's walls by Friday morning. Roman soldiers drive iron nails through his wrists and feet. He hangs there under the desert sun for roughly 6 hours. Around 3 in the afternoon, witnesses say he cries out and dies. His body is taken down, wrapped, and placed in a borrowed tomb before the Sabbath begins at sundown. 2 nights pass. Sunday at dawn, a group of women arrive to properly anoint the body and find the tomb open and empty. Within days, people are reporting they saw him alive, walking, eating, talking. Within decades, that empty tomb becomes the foundation of a faith that reshapes the entire world. It is, by any measure, one of the most consequential stories a human being has ever told about another human being. And for most of 2,000 years, almost nobody stopped to ask the one question a first-century Roman soldier would have asked immediately: how does a healthy adult male die on a cross in 6 hours, when crucifixion, as a method, was engineered by Rome to make dying take as long and as publicly horrifying as possible? Crucifixion was not just an execution. It was propaganda. Rome wanted every person walking past that hill to see a body up there for days, sometimes suffering, sometimes already picked at by birds, as a warning. Victims typically lasted anywhere from a day to 4 days, occasionally longer, dying slowly of exhaustion, asphyxiation, and blood loss as their own body weight worked against their lungs. That is not speculation. That is how the mechanism of crucifixion functions, and Roman military planners understood it well enough to use it as a deterrent for centuries. So when I tell you that the man on the central cross at Golgotha was dead in less time than it takes to watch 3 movies back to back, while the men crucified next to him were, according to the same account, still alive when the soldiers came to break their legs to hasten death, I need you to sit with that for a second. Same method, same crosses, same afternoon. 2 men dying on schedule. 1 man allegedly finished in a fraction of the expected time. That is not a footnote. That is the first thing that should never have added up. Wait. That does not add up. And once you notice it, you cannot unnotice it. I am not the first person to notice the anomaly, not by a long shot. Decades ago, Spanish journalist and investigator J.J. Benitez spent years cross-referencing Roman execution practice, first-century medical knowledge, and the internal details of the gospel accounts themselves, and he came to a conclusion that made him plenty of enemies in traditional theological circles. The timeline of the crucifixion, taken seriously as a historical document rather than a purely spiritual one, reads less like a miracle and more like the record of an emergency medical operation carried out under Roman noses, by people desperate enough to risk their own lives pulling it off. Benitez was not interested in destroying anyone's faith. He was interested in what happens when you stop treating ancient texts as untouchable and start treating them as evidence. And when you do that here, the evidence points somewhere very uncomfortable. Here is where it gets specific. According to the Gospel of Mark, when Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate for the body, Pilate was, in the original Greek, described as marveling, genuinely surprised that the man was already dead. He did not just say, "Fine, take him." He summoned the centurion who had overseen the execution and interrogated him directly before releasing the body. A career governor, who had almost certainly witnessed dozens of executions by that point, needed independent confirmation because the timing struck him as wrong. Put yourself in that room for a second. You are the most powerful Roman official in the region. Executions are routine to you, background noise in the machinery of occupation. And still, this particular death makes you pause and double-check. What does a man like that know that we do not? I have to admit something here, because it would be dishonest not to. There was a stretch of my life where I stood in front of a classroom and taught this exact timeline as settled fact, never once flagging the 6-hour death as strange. Somebody had drawn a lesson plan years before I got there, and lesson plans have a way of turning obvious contradictions invisible. You just do not see what you have been trained not to look for. It was not until years later, hunched over a photocopy of an old medical treatise at my kitchen table at 2 a.m, that the anomaly finally hit me the way it should have hit me the first time I read the crucifixion account out loud to a room full of teenagers. I remember sitting back in my chair and thinking, I taught this for years and never once asked the question a Roman soldier would have asked in 30 seconds. That is not a comfortable thing to realize about yourself. Let us go back to the tomb itself, because the next anomaly is sitting in plain sight in the Gospel of John, and it is, honestly, the detail that convinced me this deserved a full investigation rather than a passing thought. When Joseph of Arimathea and a man named Nicodemus come to prepare the body, John tells us exactly what they brought: about 100 Roman pounds of myrrh and aloes. 100 pounds. Sit with that number. That is not a symbolic gesture. That is not a handful of spices sprinkled over a shroud out of respect. That is an amount of botanical material that in the ancient world required serious money, serious planning, and almost certainly advanced knowledge that they would need it, because you do not improvise 100 pounds of medicinal herbs in the 2 or 3 hours between a death and a sundown burial deadline. But here is what actually stopped me cold. Myrrh and aloes, in the exact combination John describes, appear again and again in ancient Eastern medical treatises, not as embalming agents for the deceased, but as the core ingredients of an emergency wound compound used to treat living tissue trauma and hold off gangrene in patients who had suffered severe open injuries. One of the most detailed of these treatises, compiled by physicians working centuries after Jesus but drawing on medical traditions that long predated them, documents a 12-ingredient healing salve that historical tradition explicitly names the Ointment of Jesus, formulated specifically around myrrh, aloes, frankincense, and galbanum to close and heal wounds like the ones left by scourging and nails. Ask yourself which makes more sense: that 2 men spent a fortune on 100 pounds of burial spice for a corpse that, under Jewish law, they had less than 3 hours to bury before sundown, made further handling forbidden, or that they arrived with the exact quantity and composition of an ancient trauma kit, because the man they were carrying still had a pulse. Because of that quantity alone, the embalming explanation started to look thinner to me than it had any right to. But I want to be fair to the traditional reading for a second because a real investigation does not get to cherry-pick. Devout, wealthy mourners absolutely could go overboard with burial spices out of love and grief. People do extravagant things for the dead. I am not going to pretend that is impossible. What I cannot get past is what happens next in the story. Because 3 days later, when Mary Magdalene encounters this man outside the tomb, very much alive and very much walking around, he says something that gets glossed over in almost every sermon I ever sat through. He tells her, in effect, "Do not touch me." Not "do not touch me," because I am now divine and untouchable. The Greek behind that phrase carries the sense of stop clinging, stop holding on, more consistent with someone protecting a body that cannot bear contact yet than someone declaring new spiritual status. Think about what physical state would make a man say that. Not glowing resurrected perfection. Fresh wounds. Open lacerations across the back from scourging. Puncture wounds through the wrists and feet, freshly packed and dressed, still raw enough that a woman throwing her arms around him in relief and joy would have made him cry out in genuine physical pain. Now, if you know anything about Roman military discipline, you might already be shouting at your screen, because there is an obvious objection here, and it deserves a real answer, not a dodge. Roman soldiers who let a crucifixion victim escape or survive faced brutal punishment themselves, potentially execution. That was the entire point of Roman collective responsibility, the same principle by which soldiers who fell asleep on guard duty could be killed for it. So the idea that professional executioners would simply let this happen seems, on its face, absurd. Except we have direct historical evidence that Roman commanders absolutely did grant early removal from crosses, and that Roman guards absolutely did rely on visual signs rather than any kind of modern verification to determine death. I am going to come back to that evidence in a few minutes because it is the single strongest piece of this entire investigation, and I do not want to rush it. For now, just hold on to this. The assumption that Rome's rules were followed to the letter, every single time for every single execution, is exactly that. An assumption, and assumptions are where cover-ups hide. Here is where the story stops looking like a series of lucky coincidences and starts looking like a plan. Late in the crucifixion, according to the gospel accounts, someone soaks a sponge and lifts it to Jesus' lips on a hyssop branch. Traditionally, this has been read as an act of casual cruelty, offering a dying man sour wine to prolong his suffering, or as a small mercy, easing his thirst. But ancient pharmacological tradition tells a very different story about sponges soaked in liquid and offered at the moment of apparent collapse. Physicians in antiquity, working from pharmacopoeias that circulated for centuries across the Mediterranean and the Near East, documented what they called a soporific sponge, saturated with a mixture of substances like mandrake root, poppy extract, and hemlock. Absorbed through the mucous membranes of the mouth, that combination could induce sudden unconsciousness, dramatically slow breathing, and produce a state that would look, to any observer more than a few feet away, indistinguishable from death. Think about the sequence again with that possibility in mind. Jesus receives the sponge. Almost immediately after, witnesses say he cries out and appears to die, far earlier than physiologically typical for crucifixion. What if what the crowd actually watched was not a death, but a controlled loss of consciousness, timed by people close enough to the cross to administer it? This was intentional. That is the part that changes everything about how I read this account. A coincidence is 100 pounds of myrrh. A coincidence is Pilate's surprise. But a drugged sponge delivered at precisely the moment collapse would look convincing to Roman guards standing at a distance, stops being coincidence, and starts looking like choreography. I want to slow down here because I can already hear the next objection. and it is a fair one. If Jesus only appeared to die from the sponge, what about the spear? John's Gospel says a Roman soldier drove a spear into his side to confirm death, and blood and water flowed out. Does not that settle it? It is the detail people bring up most often to shut this conversation down. And it is also, once you actually look at the medical literature, instead of just the folk reading of it, the detail that supports the survival theory more than it undermines it. Pleural and pericardial effusion, fluid separating from blood inside the chest cavity, is a documented feature of severe hypovolemic shock and trauma. It happens while a body is still in deep, dying crisis, not only after a heart has stopped for good. A spear thrust low into the side, missing the heart's main chamber, would not have guaranteed instant death on its own. There is another number in this story that has bothered careful readers for centuries, and it is worth pulling on before we go further. Jesus himself, according to the Gospels, promises that he will be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights, the same amount of time the Hebrew Bible says the prophet Jonah spent inside the great fish. But count the actual hours in the traditional timeline. Buried Friday evening, just before sundown. Tomb found empty at first light Sunday. That is not 3 days and 3 nights. By any honest count, using the calendar of the period, that is somewhere between 36 and 40 hours. Was he really dead that whole time? Or was he in a deep, drug-induced state for a portion of it, being tended to in secret, while the guards outside the tomb entrance had no idea the man they thought was a corpse was, at certain points, breathing on his own? That gap, 36 hours, is not a rounding error in a 2,000-year-old oral tradition. It is short enough, and specific enough, that it reads far more like the recovery window a trauma patient needs after severe blood loss and shock than like a theological number chosen for symbolic reasons. Here is the second objection people raise, and it is the one that actually makes the most sense to raise. Even granting all of this, even granting the drugged sponge and the early removal and the medicinal ointments, a man who has just survived 6 hours of crucifixion, lost significant blood, and gone into shock is in no condition to roll away a stone weighing close to 2 tons and walk anywhere, let alone travel any real distance. That is true, and nobody serious in this investigation is claiming Jesus did that alone. What the timeline actually supports is something almost more remarkable than a solo miracle. It supports a coordinated operation. Joseph of Arimathea, a wealthy member of the ruling council with direct access to Pilate. Nicodemus, a Pharisee with medical and scriptural knowledge, showing up with exactly the right herbs in exactly the right quantity. A private, brand new tomb, conveniently located close to the execution site, belonging to Joseph himself according to Matthew's Gospel. And an unnamed group the Gospels only hint at, disciples working in secret, afraid of the religious authorities, who theology has always assumed were hiding out of fear and grief. What if they were not hiding out of fear and grief alone? What if some of them were hiding because they were nursing a badly wounded man back from the edge of death, under the cover of the very superstition and religious taboo around touching a corpse that made it unthinkable for Roman guards or hostile priests to walk in and check? Remember Pilate? Hesitating? Sending for confirmation before releasing the body? Keep that image in your head, because we are about to find out exactly why a Roman governor's instincts about crucifixion timing should be trusted over 2,000 years of assumption. This is the part of the investigation that made me stop treating this as an interesting theory and start treating it as something closer to established historical possibility. In the year 70 of the Common Era, Jerusalem was burning. Rome was crushing the Jewish revolt house by house, and a Jewish historian named Flavius Josephus, who had once commanded rebel forces himself before surrendering and switching sides, was moving through the wreckage under Roman protection, trying to save what and who he could. Josephus wrote his own account of what happened next, and he put it in his own memoir, not in some second-hand rumor. He says that as Roman soldiers cleared the area, crucifying prisoners along the roadside the way they had crucified thousands during that siege, he recognized 3 men hanging on crosses. Not strangers. men he knew personally, friends from before the war. Josephus did not stand there and mourn them as already lost. He went straight to the Roman general in command, a man named Titus, son of the emperor, and he begged for their lives. And Titus, holding the kind of absolute authority that could override the standard rules of a crucifixion detail in an instant, granted the request. He ordered his own physicians, the intensive medical care available to a Roman general's staff, to take the 3 men down immediately and treat them. 2 of the 3 died anyway, despite the medical attention, their bodies too far gone from blood loss and trauma. But the 3rd man lived. He fully recovered from crucifixion under direct medical care after being taken down early by Roman order. Josephus recorded this himself, plainly, without treating it as miraculous or even especially unusual, simply as something that happened to people he knew. And that detail matters more than almost anything else in this entire investigation, because it proves, from a hostile, historical, non-Christian source, that crucifixion victims in the exact same time period, region, and Roman legal system as Jesus could be taken down early by direct order of a Roman authority figure and could survive with treatment. If it happened to 3 ordinary men that Josephus personally knew during the siege of Jerusalem, it was not physically or legally impossible for it to have happened decades earlier to a man whose removal was personally requested by a wealthy council member with access to the governor himself. Now, put that historical precedent next to the modern medical literature, because this is where 2 completely independent fields, ancient history and clinical pathology, arrive at the exact same uncomfortable conclusion from opposite directions. In March of 1986, the Journal of the American Medical Association published a peer-reviewed analysis titled On the Physical Death of Jesus Christ, written by Dr. William Edwards along with 2 colleagues. Their paper worked through the physiology of crucifixion in clinical detail, hypovolemic shock from blood loss, pleural and pericardial effusion, the mechanics of asphyxiation as a body sags under its own weight. It remains, decades later, one of the most cited medical examinations of crucifixion ever published. Here is the detail that almost never gets quoted when this paper comes up in sermons or documentaries defending the traditional account. The authors themselves note that a rapid, certain death depended entirely on whether cardiac rupture or complete asphyxiation had actually occurred before the body was taken down, versus a deep state of shock that could, under the right conditions, still be survivable with immediate treatment. In other words, the very medical paper most often cited to defend a rapid, definite crucifixion, death leaves the survival window open rather than closed if the timeline and treatment lined up the way the tomb evidence suggests they did. A first-century historian who personally watched a crucified friend survive under emergency Roman medical care. A 20th-century peer-reviewed medical analysis that does not rule out survival under comparable conditions. 2 sources, separated by 1900 years, neither one written to support a religious agenda, converging on the same physical possibility. I have pulled together the fuller research behind this, the primary source excerpts, the pharmacological cross-references, the complete Josephus passage in its original context, into a more complete written collection. Because a video like this one can only hold so much before it stops being watchable. If you want to go deeper into the documented sources behind everything I have just walked you through, I put a link to that fuller collection in the comment I pinned to this video. No pressure either way. I just know some of you are the type who needs the paper trail, not just my voice telling you about it. So if this man survived the cross, what actually happened to him afterward? This is where the investigation gets stranger, and where I have to be honest with you about the limits of hard evidence, because we are moving from documented medical and historical parallels into a piece of the story that survives mostly through tradition rather than a single clean paper trail. There is a tomb in Srinagar, in the mountainous region of Kashmir, that local tradition has associated for centuries with a wandering teacher who arrived from the West, taught among communities there, and lived to old age before dying naturally and being buried according to local custom rather than through any kind of martyrdom. 19th century investigators who documented this tradition connected it explicitly to accounts of a healer surviving crucifixion in Judea and traveling east afterward. Some say specifically to reach communities the Gospels themselves describe as the lost tribes scattered across the region. I am not going to stand here and tell you that tomb definitively belongs to Jesus of Nazareth. The evidence there is oral tradition, local reverence sustained across centuries, and circumstantial correlation, not a signed document. But I will tell you this: if a man did survive the cross, the way the medical and historical evidence in this investigation suggests he could not simply reappear in Jerusalem and resume his old life. Everyone who wanted him dead was still there. The only rational move for a man protecting both his own life and the people who had risked everything to save his would have been to leave, quietly, permanently, and never come back to the city that had already tried once to kill him. Put every piece of this back on the table at once, because that is the only way the full weight of it actually lands. A cross engineered by Roman military doctrine to kill over days, ending a documented death in hours. A governor whose own reaction, recorded in the text itself, was surprise rather than routine confirmation. 100 pounds of medicinal herbs matching ingredient for ingredient. An ancient trauma compound rather than a burial spice. A sponge offered at the exact moment of apparent collapse, matching a documented ancient method for inducing a death-like unconscious state. A resurrected man who tells the first person to reach him not to touch him, consistent with fresh, unhealed wounds. A historian writing in his own memoir about people he personally knew, describing 3 crucifixion victims taken down early by Roman order, one of whom fully recovered. A peer-reviewed medical paper that does not close the door on survival under comparable conditions. None of these pieces, taken alone, proves anything. I want to be completely honest about that, because a real investigator does not get to pretend 6 suggestive details equal 1 confirmed fact. But taken together, stacked on top of each other, they stop looking like 6 unrelated oddities in an ancient story and start looking like 6 symptoms of the same underlying event. Here is what I think actually happened, based on everything this investigation has turned up. A man was crucified publicly, brutally, and was expected to die like everyone else nailed up that day. But people close to him, people with money, medical knowledge, and access to Roman authority, intervened. They may have used a drug to induce a state indistinguishable from death, shortening his apparent time on the cross. They secured his early removal through direct appeal, the exact same mechanism Josephus documents happening to 3 other men in that same legal system. They treated his wounds immediately with an emergency compound recognized across the ancient world for exactly that purpose, and they hid him, protected him, and eventually helped him disappear from a city that wanted him permanently silenced. Whether you call what remained a miracle of faith or a triumph of ancient medicine and human loyalty probably depends more on what you walked into this video already believing than on anything I have shown you today. I am not here to make that decision for you. I am here to make sure you at least know the full case exists before you decide. Here is why I think this actually matters beyond ancient history. Every single one of us has been handed some version of a story we were told not to question. A timeline that was supposed to be settled the moment we were old enough to hear it. And most of us go years, sometimes decades, without ever running the numbers ourselves, without ever asking whether the official version actually holds up against the details buried inside its own record. That was true of me with a text I read out loud in a classroom more times than I can count. It might be true of you with something else entirely, a family story, a diagnosis, an official explanation for something that never quite sat right. The instinct that made Pilate double-check before he believed a report, that same instinct is worth trusting more often than we do. So I will leave you with the same question that started this whole investigation for me, the one Pilate himself apparently could not shake. If a Roman governor who had seen more crucifixions than almost anyone alive found this particular death too fast to simply accept, Why did the rest of us spend 2,000 years accepting it without asking him what he saw that made him pause? Maybe the greatest miracle was not that a dead man walked out of that tomb. Maybe it was that a badly wounded, barely living man did, and the people who loved him made sure the world never found out how close it actually was. That is the story this investigation actually tells, once you stop reading it as scripture and start reading it as a historical case file with witnesses, physical evidence, and one very suspicious governor. Make of it what you will. I know what I believe now, and it is not what I taught for years without ever really looking. Before I let you go, I will just say this. I dig into cases exactly like this one regularly. The ones sitting in plain sight in texts everyone thinks they already know. And if this kind of investigation is the sort of thing that keeps your brain occupied long after the video ends, sticking around for the next one might be worth your while. No hard sell, just an open door if you want to keep digging with me. Now, I actually want to hear from you, because this one splits people right down the middle every time I bring it up. If you had to bet everything on one explanation for those 36 hours, genuine resurrection, or a coordinated medical survival kept secret by the people who loved him, which one are you actually betting on? And what single piece of evidence in this video moved that needle for you the most? Put it in the comments. I read everyone, and on a case this contested, I want to know exactly where you landed.